And are you available? And Ms. Walsh of the County Council will be online for any questions for the board.
Good evening, Dr. Wu, members of the board. This is Danielle Luking, Legislative and Legal Affairs Officer in the Office of the General Counsel. So this bill is, again, a County Council bill, CB 24-2021. And the committee discussed this bill in terms of, there are two portions of this bill, but for the second portion of the bill having to do with a delay in adopting zoning regulation amendments within a year of the adoption of the Howard County General Plan. And when this bill was discussed by the committee last week, they wanted to bring it forward for discussion by the full board and invite Ms. Walsh. So Ms. Catronia or Ms. Walsh, if you wanted to say anything there.
Sure, I'll start. And I want to, is Ms. Walsh online before I thank her for coming?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I thank Chair Walsh for coming and being available to answer any questions. I brought this forth to the Legislative Committee because I feel that the Board of Education needs to get more involved with ZRAs that can be potentially impactful to our enrollment and our capacity. And this bill that Ms. Walsh has filed speaks to that in the time period leading up to the general plan. And that's what the county is undergoing right now, is the next 10 years, development in the next 10 years, and the school system has a vested interest in that. So if any of my colleagues, we had several questions at our committee meeting, and so Ms. Walsh is here to answer your questions, address concerns, and see how this relates to the Board of Education.
Ms. Walsh, do you want to talk about that? Thank you. Thanks for coming here.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wu, and esteemed members of the board for having me. Member Catronio summarized it quite well. This is a bill that is relevant because of the context of the general plan that Howard County government is undergoing now. I think the last time actually that I appeared or at least attended a legislative committee meeting of yours was when we were trying to get a better handle on land reservation for schools. And what the council has run into on the legislative side since then, despite best efforts by some of my other colleagues actually, is that we can't actually legislate much more than what we have in the code now, which was as part of a review process, county government is to think about things like where would schools possibly be sited on some of these very largest developments and what can be done on the front end of those developments to make room for the schools that the new children that would live in those homes would need. And so this was kind of the reverse of it, which is if we can't legislate it, then the place that we need to address it, we're told by the Director of Department of Planning and Zoning, is in this general plan process. And so that means that all of us, not just the Board of Education, but all of us should be invested in that ongoing process right now. It's HOCO by design. Just this week, in fact, at 7 o'clock tonight, is the fourth in a series of public meetings that they're having to gain public input. But I will tell you from the very beginning of that process, before even a consultant was hired, each of the 5 council members implored Department of Planning and Zoning and the executive, its administration, to put schools at the forefront of planning, that we are always in a reactive mode based on what's gone down in the last decade or more of development in this county. And the only way that we can reverse that is to center schools planning along with all of the other infrastructure and private development that we allow to continue in this county. So if the focus where we're going to make sure that we have provision for schools is in the general plan and not specific amendments to or new legislation, then what this bill aims to do is say, look, we're a year away from a new general plan. And in the midst of this council continues to receive what is known as zoning regulation amendments. And they are proposed changes to the zoning regulations that tend to have a sweeping impact because it's not specific to one given property, but rather extends to any property that's zoned comparably. And where that's really had the greatest impact in terms of student yields is in what's known as the CAC zoning district, community activity corridor, I think. And those are all along Route 1. In my district, D1, they tend to be the River Watches and the Elk Ridge Crossing. But as you go further south, down Route 1, then you're talking about places like Blue Stream and Howard Square. And those are the kind of developments, those massive developments that singularly can bust every student yield projection that we see and result in things like a Hanover Hills or Duckett's Lane being at or near capacity the very day they're open. We can't account for the busts that those massive projects and the students that they yield push into our school system in a pretty rapid succession. And so what we've seen in the council, just actually in the last year, we didn't get so many of them in our first year, but in the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of ZRAs. And if you look back historically in our term and the preceding 4-year term, the CAC zoning is really where a lot of density has been pushed in. And the 1 or 2 biggest of those developments, Blue Stream and Etapco at Howard Square, seem to take turns coming back and asking for more exceptions to the existing regulations that allow them to build in more schools. Just last month, the council approved a ZRA that would allow the complete elimination of the commercial component of what's supposed to be a mixed use development. So now it's purely residential. And by some very late filed amendments, a majority of the council approved, allowing that elimination of commercial development in every single CAZ across the county or up and down Route 1, because that's the only place it is. And what that does is have this jarring impact. We ourselves on the council don't know what effect that's going to have. We don't know how many projects are going to result in how many additional residential units versus commercial and how many students that's going to yield. We didn't know that when we approved that bill last month. So there's no way that a school planning agency can have any way of reacting to that. And there's no way that we can pretend as a government that we're prepared to receive those kids and do them good. So this same kind of bill was proposed in Anne Arundel County by the then executive, and the council approved it. It's just to allow the existing planning process, this 10-year vision document, to get into place without having these little kind of pecks at it at the very last end before we basically do away with what was there before and enter into the new plan. And so it's a sunset provision basically on ZRAs and lets everything kind of settle as we look towards the future and whatever this new plan holds for the county.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh. We have board members have some questions. Please raise your hand. First, Ms. Watts.
One of the questions I had when we were meeting as the legislative committee was, is there a reason that you're doing this 9 years out as opposed to 1 year prior? Because the question was, could there be a possibility where the general plan actually gets extended beyond the 10-year mark, so we're in year 11, 12, or something with the exact same plan, and now we have this 3-year timeline where we're kind of holding up the construction? Is it possible to just do it 1 year out so that like it's always consistently the same?
Yeah, we the 10-year requirement is by state code, so that's how we backed it up. To be compliant with state code, we need to be looking at that general plan every 10 years. So that's why we did it -9, so that there would be this incentive. You know, we don't want the foot dragging. We want to be compliant with state law. We want to update the general plan on the required timetable, and we want to take that break in that last year before we get to whatever the new vision is. So that we didn't want to put in a situation that contemplated that we weren't going to be complying with state law.
Okay, so the goal is that, or the thought is that the general plan actually always happens on the 10-year cycle, and there's no exceptions to that.
Right, and it may, I mean, it's actually, I think the reverse is possible. The last general plan was adopted in 2013. So if we may actually be a year ahead of time. So this may not take effect if we're ahead of schedule, but it definitely would be an incentive not to fall behind the state required timetable.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Marlowe, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, Chair Walsh. I just am seeking clarification. So when a ZRA is brought before the county council, you have no ability to limit it to the particular area or particular project, correct?
In theory, yes, that would be called spot zoning, and we are not supposed to do that.
Okay. And rather than change the structure, I assume that's not a possibility, to be able to change the structure rather than this component of the zoning regulations.
Yeah, in terms of a structure that's like a state mandate in terms of how we approach general planning, comprehensive planning, and how our individual county, accomplishes that through our own code. This seemed like the cleanest way to get to that point.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker, Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Chair Walsh, for coming. I have a specific question on the council summary. It writes, requiring a specified report related to disclosure of certain contributions and business relationships in the compliance with the Maryland Public Ethics Law. Does that not already happen, or is it just confirming it?
Thank you for asking that question, Mr. Khan. It does not already happen. It should happen. Same thing. It's in our state code. It's explicit in our state code. It says before you make an application, you file these disclosures, and it says before the council considers these zoning applications, we get a summary report of those disclosures. And if there's any disclosures made since the initial disclosure was made, you got to update it. That never happens. It's come up before the zoning board, and it resulted in a months-long delay because an applicant kept finding more LLCs that had made donations to more campaign accounts. It's, to some of us, it's a big deal. Land use is big money in this county, and influence, it can be made, it seems like. And so this is to daylight that provision and to put more of an onus on us, the council and county government, to, again, comply with that state law. I thought that would be the non-controversial part of this bill since it's already in state law, but that's the one I get the squawking about.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm next. So I really appreciate Chair Walsh come here, share this with us. Thank you very much. I think I like the idea of the public ask report made by applicants for developing regarding campaign contribution or business with the county council members or the county executive. So one question is, what happens if they made a contribution after you approve the application?
Then they have to report it the next time they come around, which in the case of these CACs would be about a year and a half later.
Or maybe they change their name next time they make contribution. That means that contribution will go away, or?
Well, no, because the definition in the state code in terms of who the applicant, they define it in terms of an applicant for a zoning application. And the way that applicant, capital A, is defined in the state code is so broad. It's something like if you own 3% of any business that's associated with the business that's making the petition or owns the land. So it can, especially when, some of these developers operate in these single site LLCs for each development project, it reaches all of those tentacles. So it really does daylight where the relationships are and where the influence might be being wielded.
I see, thank you. So I hope at least this will help shed some light and make it more transparent. And
Yes.
I think the second question about prohibit action on proposed zoning regulation amendment during a period leading up to the adoption of a new Howard County general plan. I think I really like this one because right now, the high density development, especially in the east area, right? High School 13 probably will not be built in another 10 years due to funding issues, right? And where the student will go, I think I have a huge concern there. I hope this amendment will help address that issue a little bit.
Yeah, I mean I'm right. That's the issue for those of us who represent constituents on the eastern side of the county. Is that's where these developments have been crammed in, despite no pretense even of being able to provide the same infrastructure that exists elsewhere in the county or has historically existed, and yet we continue full bear.
Thank
Full
you.
bore. I can't conjugate a verb tonight.
Thank you.
I'm using the wrong ones.
Okay, our next speaker is Ms. Damasmo.
Thank you very much, not only for the legislation, but also for coming and being willing to answer our questions. I see this legislation and hopefully the support of this board for that legislation as a good continuing step of our two bodies working together in order to do all that we can possibly do to eliminate and negate as much as possible the negative impacts on capacity that the development presents in Howard County and continues to present as we continue to move forward. So as far as the ZRAs and with the general plan process, so is there, for lack of a better term, a mad rush at this time period for changes to be made prior to the general plan?
That's what it seems like. I mean, obviously, this council's only been there for 2.5 years, and we're 8 or so years into the old plan. But that, I mean, this bill was actually proposed to me by, a 20-year veteran of the council office, Theo Wimberly, our acting council administrator, because I said, why are these coming in all of a sudden? And I think it makes sense. You're getting to the end of the old plan, so people are like, this doesn't really work for me anymore. We're 8 years into this thing, and I don't want to do it like that, or this hasn't worked, right? That's always the CAC argument. It's still not working. And so I want to change it. But does it make sense to keep allowing these exemptions to an old plan, in this short time period before we get the new, everybody really thought about it and agreed to it, new plan? So I think that is what the fear is that I am at least perceiving an uptick, and that will only continue as we get closer and closer to the new one, especially if a given project or site owner will see they don't like the way that the new plan is going, right? So I'm going to come in and get one last bite at this before the new system is in place.
So what it basically is, it's a way for individuals or entities to circumvent the general plan process that we are going into in order to come up with a new general plan, which again is supposed to guide the county in moving forward as to infrastructure and development and so on.
For sure, right? I made a crack at one of our work sessions, which is we're not telling developers and these property owners to go play a board game on their laptop like we tell our constituents. We don't tell them to fill out surveys that don't mention schools until the 15th screen of a survey. They just have their lawyers file an application and they wait long enough and get the approvals up the chain of custody, and then come before the council, and then so far a majority of us approve it. So it definitely seems to be circumventing existing plans, existing regulations, and just this general process that includes everyone in a vision document.
Yeah, and I think the only way we, both as a school system and as a county, are going to be able to attack and mitigate the issues we have with capacity is that if we do put the schools at the forefront, and that we do realize that they are a very necessary piece of the infrastructure. And it is very disturbing to me as a board member when I hear about more and more development and being told, oh, well, don't worry about it, it's not going to be that many kids. And then we look at it, and we're able to look at it now by Polygon, because we have a board member who goes through all of this, and we are seeing that the numbers there are upticks in these numbers. So I believe that anything that will help the process actually reach the result, which is to have community input and input from, I would say, other elected bodies to move forward, is a good idea. And with regard to the part on the campaign contributions, I think that is especially since it's not being done, that I think that will help provide additional clarity and transparency with the process. So thank you.
Okay, Ms. Mahler.
You've done a great job articulating the merits of this. What do you suspect are the biggest impediments or problems with this, or potential problems that you would see if we were to support this and it were eventually passed?
Why none, Ms. Mello?
Okay.
No, it really was, a lot. I obviously came into office with an agenda that had a lot to do with Old Ellicott City, but, adequate public facilities ordinance. There were some issues that I ran. So we had some good news, actually, on all those fronts this week. But this literally was proposed to me by Theo, in a conversation where I'm like, what are these things? Why are we like in the midst of all these like one-off changes? Like, this is very time consuming. And to see that Anne Arundel County's executive proposed the same kind of law as they were going through their own general plan process, and that was adopted by the council. The thinking really was this was going to be like a consensus bill, and there really isn't any harm, right? You want to give the processes in place the chance to function as they were intended. So I am not able to articulate for you the downside or the impediment to this. I'm not.
Oh, okay. If you could, I appreciate it. And I thank you for your candor.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, earlier when I talk about it, I'm talking about high school 14, which is maybe 10, yeah. Sorry for that, maybe 10 years far away. And high school 13 is on the ground. We are actively building that. So I just want to assure the committee on that for that area. And then our next speaker is Ms. Mosley.
Hello, thank you for coming to the meeting. One of the conversations I hear in the community about community concern is not only the planning of building new schools, but also the renovation or expansion of existing schools. So I don't want that to be lost in the conversation as well, because that is important for, especially in our communities where there is not new development and they have aging infrastructure as well. Sometimes the focus is on capacity, not necessarily on the aging infrastructure. So I just wanted to throw that into the conversation because it is something that is very important.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Do we have other questions? Dr. Liu.
So I have a question actually about development and elementary school. I know Inter Valley area is very overcrowded, and then I hope that the county council will provide capital budget for us.
Maybe your mic is off. Can you check?
Oh, I saw this on. Can people hear me? Okay, maybe I'm too far away, yeah. So I'm also talking about the overcrowding issue, especially, for example, Turf Valley area, the elementary schools overcrowded. So what will be the impact of this bill on the newly developed area? And how can the county council provide capital budget for our schools, not only new schools, as well as school renovation?
Those are two questions, right, Dr.
Yes, two questions.
Okay, I think I got it. Okay, so the first question is, I actually tried specific to Turf Valley a couple of months ago to include Turf Valley in AFO considerations. They are excluded by virtue of some plan submission made in 1986 from a lot of county laws, including ensuring that school capacity exists for new kids generated by the new homes built there. And that did not pass a majority of the council. I know actually there's a ZRA that's going to probably be before us this month, specific to Turf Valley, but it doesn't have anything to do with school capacity. It's a gas station. But that Turf Valley is kind of its own animal because it's the only district in the county that has this planned golf course community zoning district. And they call the shots. So I took a swing at that, knowing that even in District 1, although Turf Valley is in District 5, a lot of our kids go to the same schools, and a lot of those schools are overcrowded. And so, and I think it's a countywide issue anyhow, but I've tried to legislate a solution at Turf Valley, and it hasn't succeeded. On the budget side, the rules for the council are pretty specific in that we can't add to the budget that's presented to us by the executive. We can cut for education. We do have one exception, which is we can cut and we can add back to education, but we can't increase whatever the starting point is that we receive from the executive. And so the council gets that capital budget April 1, and we get the operating budget later in the month. But and individually, I'll assure you that we will leave that funding for capital projects intact, and I think we largely have, even when there's not a state commitment to the extent that we would have liked. But we can't. We are not the starting point for how the capital projects are funded in each annual budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have other questions? Otherwise, okay, you didn't raise your hand. Okay. Ms. Quattrino.
Oh, thank you. I move to support CB 24, to take a position of support, CB 24-2021.
Second, this is Dr. Liu.
Ms. Hanks, did you capture that?
2021, right? Okay. So we have a motion by Ms. Cotroneo and a second by Dr. Liu to move to support CB 24-2021. Ms. Cotroneo.
Yes.
Ms. Delmont Small.
Yes.
Mr. Kong.
Yes.
Dr. Liu.
Yes.
Ms. Mallow.
Yes.
Ms. Mosley,
Yes.
Ms. Watts,
Yes.
Dr. Wu.
Yes,
Motion passes 8-0.
thank you.